How's it going, folks? I'm Matthew. This is Lemora's Cards, and today we're going to be talking about some more Modern Horizons 3 cards. We've got value engines, we got new combo pieces, we have stuff that, the low color decks might like, the high color decks might like, and maybe just a new Ristic Study level staple in the format. So pretty wild stuff to go over. Thank you to all my amazing patrons over on Patreon who support me, help me make videos like this, get access to coaching, private deck videos, early uploads, all that good stuff. With all that being said, let's hop into it. Use the link in the description below to download Whatnot, and you'll get $15 to use to buy Magic singles, sealed product, get anything that you want really. There's no limits. You just get $15 on the account for free just for signing up. This is one of the best ways you can support the channel. And again, it's just free stuff. Use the link in the description below. Give Whatnot a try. First card we're looking at is Ripples of Undeath. This is kind of looking like the Black Sylvan Library is what a lot of people are calling it. 1 and a black enchantment at the beginning of your pre-combat main phase, mill 3 cards. Then you may pay 1 mana and 3 life. If you do, put a card from among those cards into your hand. So we have a bit of a self-mill value engine that either way, you're always going to be milling 3 cards a turn. And if you'd like to, you can pay 1, 3 life, draw a card. The timing on this card is about the best you could hope for. Pre-combat main phase means you get to see your draw step, you got access to all the information, you mill 3 cards, so you get to see all the cards that you might potentially want to get to your hand, and then you get to decide. So this is working pretty well in favor of the player. 1 mana for 1 card, not always the best, but it is with a lot of selection. You're getting to choose between 3 cards, so it's kind of like, a ponder-ish. Plus, on top of that, you are filling that graveyard. If you're a breach deck, you're a reanimator deck, any of that, you can mill stuff over. Even lets you kind of do things like draw for turn. Oh, I drew a top deck tutor. Ripples of Undeath trigger on the stack. Cast my top deck tutor. Get access to that card if if that's what you want to do. It gives you a lot of flexibility. I kind of expect it to be in that Sylvan Library-ish tier. Maybe some low color decks want it. Not the fastest thing in the world, not the most amazing value engine, but it is going to kind of churn through your deck and help you get some selection, mainly on the lower color, grindier side, or really graveyard centric, but we'll see. Then we have Amphibian Downpour, a card I think people might be overlooking a little bit. It's 2 and a blue enchantment aura with flash. Storm, enchant creature. Enchanted creature loses all abilities and is a blue frog creature token with base power and toughness 1/1. So I think it's really similar to cards like March of Swirling Mist and Dress Down, which have commonly be used sort of on the end step to, get rid of some threats, disable creatures so that I can go into my combo turn, turn off something like an Oof, a Draenith Magistrate, an Archon of Emeria, so that I can go through my turn and hopefully win. But they do stay in play too. So you can use this on like a Crom or some other, like a Timna or some other value generating creature, threat on the board, and it's turned off for now. It can kind of be like a one-sided humility when you play it. So I think there's a lot of value in that. It doesn't have that tension with Dress Down of like, okay, well, I need to dress down into my turn to have any kind of way to win, but then I can't sequence that into Dockside. I have to get rid of it if I want a Thassa's Oracle. There's some tension there where this is just like, hey, if they cast 2 or 3 spells in their turn, I get to use this and turn everybody's creatures into 1/1s except for mine and pop off, see what happens. Let's try to go off. So I really think this is a card to consider in that sort of slot if you're interested in cards like those. It doesn't have the ability to like catch an ETB before it happens like Dress Down, but it is much better at getting rid of something more long-term, if not permanently. I think this is one to consider and to think about in your, not necessarily proactive decks. Usually, those are the ones on those kind of cards, but maybe any kind of deck that, needs to get rid of a couple creatures all at once. Think about this card. Next up, we have Flare of Fortitude, the white flare. Maybe not the best in the cycle for cEDH. 2 white, sacrifice a non-token white creature rather than pay its cost. So in a turn, your life total can't change. Permanents you control gain hexproof and indestructible. So this interacts the way you want it to with Ad Nauseam. That's kind of the main, cEDH specific synergy. You can sack my Esper Sentinel, Ad Nauseam my entire deck, not have to worry about it. The rest of it is maybe just not really what we're looking for. Paying the actual full mana price for this spell is incredibly inefficient for what you're getting. There aren't a lot of, decks that run a ton of white creatures that they're willing to sacrifice off. There's basically no commanders you want to sacrifice to this. A lot of the things you would want to protect with a card like this, they're the white cards you have to sack, like Grand Abolisher, Ranger Captain of Eos, Esper Sentinel, Timna, Tivit. Probably don't have to protect him that much, but sometimes. It's going to be tougher for some decks to make that work. There might be some decks, that are like higher on the white creature count. They may be able to make this happen. But in general, I think it might be a little awkward and it might be one of the cards in the cycle that's the most at odds with itself, at least for cEDH. It may show up. It's a card to think about, but I don't expect it to see a ton of play necessarily. Next up, we have Six, which is a legendary creature for 2 and a green with reach. It's a 2/4. And whenever it attacks, mill 3 cards. You may put a land card from among them into your hand. As long as it's your turn, non-land permanent cards in your graveyard have retrace, which is discard a land to cast that spell from your graveyard. You have to pay its regular mana cost, but for instance, if you have a Dockside Extortionist in your graveyard, you can discard a land, pay 1 in a red, cast that Dockside from your graveyard. That's powerful. You don't need me to tell you that being able to recur spells and cast them directly from your graveyard is a pretty powerful effect. Works amazingly with cards like Lotus Petal, anything that's going to be able to sack itself and go back to the yard, or also just for decks that are looking to sacrifice things repeatedly. A deck like Corvold, for instance, I can cast that Dockside, sack it a Skirk Prospector, discard a land. I'm drawing cards with Corvold. I'm going to hit some lands that I can discard to keep that engine going. That's going to be pretty good. That's going to be pretty busted. I'm looking forward to seeing how Corvold plays after this. Obviously, decks like Gitrog Monster, when you retrace, you get to draw a card. That's pretty hot. There's some combo application for it. I'm not sure if people are going to be running combo pieces that work with this, like Life from the Loam or something to, you know, go off, but that is potential. But just in general, being able to cast spells from your graveyard, super powerful in this format. It's probably the best post ad nauseum green card we've got maybe ever, where, you know, I have a 6 in play for a turn or two, just kind of a value engine-y thing. And then, you know, I cast my ad nauseum, it resolves. And now basically every permanent in my graveyard, I just discard those lands I drew through Naws and I'm able to recast them. I basically like doubled up my Naws, where all my misses off the Naws were also hits. That's going to be strong and that's going to be pretty hot. Really looking forward to seeing this card in action. I think it's going to be great in those, like, you know, Jund Turbo decks. I think it's going to be great in mid-range value piles. I'm looking forward to trying it in something like Rog Thras, where we're on the, you know, slightly higher land count, discard a land, you know, try to recast that Dockside, recast that Kinnan, Basalt Monolith, whatever. Get those permanents back from my yard. We're a creature combo deck. Let's go off. Really excited about the potential of this card, and it just looks like a super fun and super cool card. Welcome to TopDeck.gg, your community's home for everything competitive Magic has to offer. Whether you're hosting an event, playing for a huge prize, or trying to advertise your store to thousands of players, we've got you covered. Using intuitive pairing software, playing Magic is a breeze. All your players have to do is sign up online, then scan the QR code in store. Give your competitors the gift of perfect information as their bracket updates in real time. Then, when the match is decided, our self-reporting software saves you time and leaves paper match slips in the past. Leave the heavy lifting to us so your community can sit back, relax, and have a great day of playing Magic. Next up, we have a little bit of a cycle with new MDFC cards. First up, we're looking at the blue one, Sink into Stupor, where 1 blue, instant, return target spell or non-land permanent opponent controls to its owner's hand. And on the back, it is a blue land that you can pay 3 life to have enter untapped. Like we saw with the channel lands, any kind of spell-like effect on a land slot, it's something to consider. The MDFCs that came in untapped from Zendikar Rising had some, you know, were a little awkward in cEDH. A lot of them didn't have effects that a lot of decks wanted. They're typically not that great with, you know, like an ad nauseum deck where you're turning that 0 mana slot into like a 3 mana slot or a 7 mana slot or whatever with some of those. They didn't line up that great, but something like this that has a pretty relevant effect that sometimes you're going to want to use and sometimes you'll use as the flexibility of a land. This is a card you have to think about. This is a thing that you will consider for most of your mana bases going forward, especially in lower color blue decks. It doesn't have that channel land bonus of, you know, oh, this thing's pretty much uncounterable. You know, you have to have a deflecting swat or bust. Doesn't have that, but it is also, you know, it is still extremely flexible. Spell slot that is a land slot. You got to think about the power level of that. That's something you have to think about forever. And this one, you know, the modes on the front side are very relevant. They're a little overcosted, but that's to be expected with a card like this. And we saw the black one as well. Boggart Trawler, 2 and a black, Goblin, 3/1. When it enters the battlefield, exile target player's graveyard, and it's a black land on the back. A little bit weaker, I think, than the other one. This is an effect. This is an effect that is good in cEDH. Graveyard's a major component of the way that our games play out. But, you know, the sorcery speed part of it, the black decks in the format not necessarily being the most reactive. I don't think this is quite going to make it there. Maybe again in some of the lower color black decks you might see it. I think the instant speed ones that, you know, just have a little bit more flexibility probably going to be better than something like this. But this is a card you might expect to see in like any monocolor black deck going forward, where the cost of including it is pretty much negligible. And then we also have potentially a cycle of 2-color MDFCs where there's a 2-color land on the back that is tapped. So we saw the Dimir one, which is 3 and then hybrid Dimir mana. Instant, search your library for an instant card or a card with flash, reveal it, put it in your hand, shuffle. And then the backside is a blue-black tapped land. Now for these, the cost is definitely higher. It's not free to have a tap land in your deck, especially one that isn't like fetchable and has an effect when you use it as a land. People talk about the surveil lands just being like, oh, it's all downside, they're tap lands. No. It's way different. You can get it whenever you need it. Those are like upside when you get to use them. Those are very powerful effects. Here, the land is very much like the fail case of these cards. Coming in tapped. If you need to do it, don't feel bad about doing it, but that isn't like, amazing. This effect is powerful. It's good. Dimir decks want to have instants in their hand and they want to be able to tutor, but it might be just a little on the expensive side, especially considering that the land is coming into play tapped. I feel like the two halves of these cards might be a little too weak. Again, you might see them in like exactly Dimir decks. Maybe something like Nimrus wants this, I don't know, or Talion, but I think it might be just a little bit too on the weak side, but it is again another card that you have to consider because throwing a spell on a land is incredibly powerful. And next up, we have another in this sort of cycle of reserve list cards redone with energy, and that's with Wheel of Potential. 2 in a red, you get 3 energy counters, and then you may pay X energy counters. Each player may exile their hand and draw X cards. If X is 7 or more, you may play cards you own exile this way until the end of your next turn. The base rate of this is 3 mana. Each player can exile their hand and draw 3 cards. Not amazing. Sometimes that'll be okay enough, but I don't think most decks are going to want that effect. Where this might come up and be much more interesting is in decks that can generate a lot of energy. If there's a lot of those energy cards that you're running, or if there's a really powerful energy commander that gets printed or shown, that is where it's much more interesting, because if you do get that 7 or more clause, you basically break the wheel's symmetry on its own, because you're getting access to all those cards you exiled plus your new 7, whereas everybody else just gets their new 7. And if they wanted that 7, they had to exile their hand, which is a much more significant cost than discarding it. I don't expect this one to see nearly as much play as, other wheel variants, even something like a Wheel of Misfortune. It does have potential that with, potential commanders that come out, or if there are enough energy cards that see play, you might expect to see it somewhere. I don't expect to see it everywhere, but it is a card to consider because again, the upside on it is very extreme. It's actually, if you get to do all the things, if you get to jump through all the hoops, it is an incredibly powerful card. And next up is a card with very little cost, and that is Sworn Soultrader. For 2 and a black, you get a zombie goblin wizard 3/3 creature that has pay 1 life, sacrifice another creature, create a treasure token. No once per turn, no sorcery speed, no other restriction, sack a creature, make a treasure, boom bop beam. Yes, if you're asking yourself, is this a Corvold card? The answer is yes for this one. This is probably the best alter of whatever effect that we've gotten, and maybe ever. It is restricted to black decks, of course, but this is very powerful. Being able to stockpile that mana alone is just much better than something like Alter Phyrexia does. But this is where this card is like definitely at its peak, is with a card like Corvold in play, where I get to sacrifice a creature, Corvold trigger, draw a card, make a treasure, sack that treasure, make a mana, Corvold trigger, draw a card. That's absurd. That is very, very powerful. That is some really strong synergy. Whether or not this is like the new best card in the deck, I still think it's going to be worse than, something like Dockside or Ruthless Technomancer, but it might be slept on a little bit at first, like Ruthless Technomancer, where people are like, oh, is it too cutesy? Is it too this? It looks very strong. If you play this and, you got a couple dorks in play, some of those creatures you don't really care so much about, it's going to go ridiculous. And again, it's another way to get that Dockside into our graveyard. Anytime we're doing like Chthonian Nightmare stuff, any of that reanimation stuff where you're doing that thing with Corvold, some of the best stuff you can do, and this makes it significantly more powerful. Like, this is way better than Skirk Prospector, which is slam dunk card in the deck. This is a card, you're going to see it in, Dargo decks will try it, Corvold decks are going to run it. I don't expect to see it everywhere, but it is very powerful. And speaking of very powerful, last up, we finally got it. We got the red Ristic study maybe, and that is Powerbalance. Red, enchantment. Whenever an opponent casts a spell, you may reveal the top card of your library. If you do, you may cast that spell without paying its mana cost if the 2 spells have the same mana value. So this is a red counterbalance that is sort of reversed, where instead of revealing a card to counter your spell, I reveal a card to cast a spell. Kind of busted part is if I reveal a counter spell, it also is counterbalance. This is nuts. This thing is super proactively strong. This is going to be a staple for some decks. I'm not sure if every pile is going to run it, like Ristic Mystic. If it's quite on that level, maybe it's closer to Esper Sentinel, which is still pretty strong. It's hard to say, but I do expect this to be on the stronger side of those type of cards. Its synergy with any sort of top deck manipulation, fetch lands, surveil lands, top deck tutors especially. Your opponent casts Crom, you in response Mystical Tutor for ad nauseum, cast My Naws. That is a play that is just like busted and breaks the game open. That's the kind of stuff you want to do in cEDH. It overlaps amazingly surprisingly well with other cards that are drawing your top card, right? If I power balance and I reveal a land, and then somebody triggers my Ristic Study and I get to draw that land, power balance is back online. It also overlaps incredibly well with stuff like the sort of Rakdos, Bolas' Citadel top decks that already want to run those two cards or would consider those two cards as just a powerful synergy and a way to bust open a game. This card lines up incredibly well, much like regular Counterbalance does with Sensei's Divining Top. And so if you have an extra reason to make those cards busted, more the merrier, you know, throw them in the deck, throw that power balance in there. You know, those Rakdos Storm decks get to go even crazier with this. You know, decks like Roxai that have a 24 land count and a whole bunch of 1s, 2s, and 3s in their deck. Most spells in the format are those mana values. I'm probably going to get a lot of triggers. This is going to be a card that you expect to see. Whether or not it shows to be, you know, the new Ristic Study, or if it's, you know, below that, we'll have to see. It might vary deck to deck more than a card like that does, but this is definitely a card that people are going to be testing with, and that looks incredibly exciting, and I can't wait to see. Just want it broken enough to be fun, you know? Thank you so much for watching. Let me know down below which of these cards was your favorite. I'm super hyped for Power Balance. I'm super hyped for the new Goblin and Korvold. Really ready to see what some of those other MDFC cards look like. You know, we haven't seen the green, red, or white ones yet. Thank you so much for watching. And as always, go play cEDH. Have a good one, everybody.